Imagine a map where a single line of ink determines the fate of millions for a century. In 1916, two men in a smoky room drew borders that ignored thousand-year-old cultures, effectively booby-trapping the modern Middle East. We are uncovering the secret deal that traded ancient identities for colonial power. Before the borders, before the flags, before the conflicts dominating headlines today, the Middle East was something entirely different. For over 400 years, much of the region was controlled by the powerful Ottoman Empire. But unlike modern nation-states, the Ottoman system wasn't built around sharp borders. Tribes moved freely across deserts. Merchants traveled ancient trade routes. Kurds, Arabs, Turks, Armenians, Assyrians, Druze, Jews, and countless other communities lived across overlapping regions connected by history, religion, and culture. Cities like Damascus, Baghdad, and Jerusalem had existed for thousands of years before modern Europe even imagined today's borders. Then came World War I, and everything changed. The Ottoman Empire sided with Germany and the Central Powers. Britain and France saw an opportunity, not just to win the war, but to reshape the Middle East for themselves. In 1916, while the world was distracted by war, two diplomats secretly met to divide the collapsing Ottoman territories. One was British diplomat Mark Sykes. The other was French diplomat François-Georges Picot. Together, they created what became known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The agreement was astonishingly simple. Britain and France would secretly split huge parts of the Middle East into spheres of control after the war ended. France would dominate areas around modern-day Syria and Lebanon. Britain would control regions around Iraq, Jordan, and routes leading toward India. And Palestine, one of the most sacred lands on earth, would receive special international administration. The shocking part? The people actually living there were never consulted. Entire populations became bargaining chips in European negotiations. Ancient communities were sliced apart with rulers and pens, inside government offices, thousands of miles away. Many historians later described the borders as artificial creations, designed for imperial convenience rather than cultural reality. And for decades, most people in the region didn't even know the deal existed, because it was secret. But the Sykes-Picot Agreement wasn't the only promise being made. At the exact same time, Britain was secretly negotiating with France. It was also making promises to Arab leaders. British officials encouraged Arab revolts against the Ottoman Empire by suggesting that Arabs would gain independence after the war. One key figure was Hussein bin Ali, leader of the Arab revolt. Arab fighters believed they were helping create a free Arab kingdom. Meanwhile, Britain was also communicating with Zionist leaders. In 1917, the Balfour Declaration expressed support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Think about that for a second. Britain had effectively made overlapping promises to multiple groups, while simultaneously planning secret colonial control with France. It was diplomacy built on contradiction. And once the war ended, those contradictions exploded. When the Ottoman Empire finally collapsed after World War I, Britain and France moved quickly to enforce their agreement. New borders appeared almost overnight. Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine. Modern states were being born. But many locals saw them not as natural nations, but as foreign creations imposed from outside. The consequences were enormous. Take Iraq, for example. The British merged 3 former Ottoman provinces into one country. Inside this new state were Sunni Arabs, Shia Arabs, Kurds, and many minority groups with different histories and political interests. The borders created tensions that would shape Iraq for generations. Further north, the Kurdish people found themselves divided across several countries, including Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran. Despite being one of the largest ethnic groups without a state, they never received an independent homeland. In Palestine, competing nationalist movements intensified. Tensions between Arab Palestinians and Jewish immigrants steadily grew under British rule. Those tensions would later contribute to one of the most enduring conflicts in modern history. Meanwhile, France imposed control over Syria and Lebanon, often favoring certain communities over others to maintain influence. Colonial powers believed they could engineer stability from above. But the borders often ignored tribal territories. Religious divisions, ancient alliances, and local identities. Some historians argue the region was set up like a pressure cooker. Not every conflict in the Middle East came from Sykes-Picot, but the agreement undeniably laid foundations for instability that outside powers repeatedly intensified throughout the 20th century. And here's the most haunting part. Many of those borders still exist today. More than a century later, the shadow of the Sykes-Picot Agreement still hangs over global politics. Whenever violence erupts in Iraq, whenever Syria fractures, whenever debates over Kurdish independence emerge, people still reference those lines drawn in 1916. Even extremist groups have invoked Sykes-Picot in propaganda, claiming they were destroying colonial borders. That's how powerful the agreement became. It transformed from a wartime document into a symbol of betrayal, foreign interference, and imposed division. But history is rarely simple. Some experts argue the Middle East's problems cannot be blamed entirely on colonial borders. Dictatorships, Cold War interventions, oil politics, corruption, foreign invasions, and internal struggles also shaped the region. Still, the agreement represented a turning point, a moment when distant empires decided the fate of millions without democratic consent, and many people in the region never forgot it. In schools, speeches, documentaries, and political movements, Sykes-Picot became shorthand for broken promises and outside manipulation. A reminder that maps are never just geography, they are power. Behind every border, there were real people, families separated by new checkpoints, communities suddenly labeled minorities inside unfamiliar states, tribes split across countries, religious groups trapped inside political systems they never chose. The map looked neat on paper, reality was not. And as decades passed, coups, wars, revolutions, occupations, and uprisings repeatedly exposed the fragility beneath those borders. Millions would eventually suffer displacement and violence linked to political systems born from that post-war order. What began as secret wartime diplomacy eventually influenced generations of conflict and instability, all because a few officials believed they could redesign civilizations from a table in Europe. The next time you look at a map of the Middle East, remember this. Many of those borders were not ancient. They were negotiated, calculated, and imposed during one of history's deadliest wars. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was more than a document. It was a decision that reshaped nations, identities, and geopolitics for over a century. A reminder that lines drawn in secret rooms can echo across generations. And perhaps the most chilling lesson of all, sometimes the deadliest weapons in history are not bombs or bullets, but pens. If you enjoyed this documentary, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video, because history is often far more shocking than fiction. And some of the world's biggest conflicts began with secrets most people were never meant to know.